Hi, everybody. My name is Alicia Rodell. I'm the Government Contracting Assistant Specialist at Greater Spokane Incorporated. And with me is Rebecca Miller. She's a program manager. There she is, waving, saying hi, if you guys can see her as well. Um, we were taught this class in one of our trainings, and we decided it was something that we should share with all of you since there is such valuable information within it. So tonight, thank you for joining us for contracting in times of disaster. Looks like we have a few more questions coming through the chat. Oh, it says we can't see her. Well, she turned her camera on for a second and waved, but she's here too. So with
Yeah,
that,
no,
I will get
I'm sorry. I appreciate the introduction, Alicia, and I will be monitoring the chat for Alicia, and she is the real expert in Washington State. So we will be relying on her expertise today, and I'm just here to support.
So with that, there's a lot of things that people hear as we get into disaster contracting and FEMA contracting and things like that. And everybody thinks that FEMA is the one all be all. So a couple of things that we hear quite often is, I want to get a FEMA contract. I am from Washington and I want to go to Florida to help. I have a truck and I can do hurricane cleanup and bottled water delivery. Or my buddy's cousin went down there and is making $4,000 cash a day. Well, I hate to break it to you guys, but these are a little bit, something that we like to call urban legends because it doesn't necessarily happen in this order. So, somewhere between an incident and an apocalypse are these categories. So, we have an emergency, which is a hurricane, tornado, storm, and so on and so forth, earthquake, volcanic eruption, landslide. A lot of these won't necessarily affect us over here in Washington State, but we do have our big telltale sign about the great earthquake, and we do have a volcano over here, and Lord knows we've been dealing with our own, fires and things like that. So then from an emergency, there's a disaster. So it's a large scale emergency, a natural or technological accident or human caused event that results in severe property damage, deaths, and multiple injuries. And then a catastrophe. So that's even bigger. So even it's a large scale disaster on extraordinary levels that ruins which results in mass casualties across the board. So I know y'all didn't come here for a history lesson, but these history lessons do become important as you go through and start understanding how and what and why. So the Congressional Act of 1803 was the first recorded mention of disaster relief by legislation following a fire in Portsmouth. It temporarily halted fees, bonds by shipping companies and sailors. Then there's the Disaster Relief Act. We will be touching on more of these as we go along, so I won't go too super in depth, but the Disaster Relief Act was started in 1970 with Nixon, and then there was amendments in 1974. Before this, over 100 agencies had their hands in disaster aid. There's some more rules that go around surrounding this. In 1979, President Carter created FEMA. So FEMA is where everybody's heads are at. Oh, and I forgot to mention, feel free to interrupt at any time with questions. I'm more than happy. You can put them in the Q&A or in the chat. I left out the housekeeping at the beginning. And then there was the Stafford Act, the 1988 statutory authority for most federal disaster response activities, which were established by the presidential declaration process. And then Disaster Mitigation Act of 2000, it amended the Stafford Act, and then Department of Homeland Security in 2002, following 9/11. So the Defense Production Act, it's a primary source of presidential authorities to expedite and expand the supply of materials and serving the U.S. industrial base. So this one, it gives authorities or DPA authorities may support emergency activities related to the Stafford Act, and it can also protect or restore critical infrastructure. There's also the Post-Katrina Emergency Management Reform Act. So in August 29th, 2005, Hurricane Katrina became the most devastated natural disaster in the U.S. history. As a result, President Bush signed into law the Post-Katrina Reform Act. The act significantly reorganized FEMA, so there was a big, huge restructuring that went on with this. And then we have the Sandy Recovery Improvement Act as well. And in tune that followed suit with that was the Disaster Recovery Reform Act. I won't take the time to read all of the slides because there's a lot of information on here. We don't traditionally set up our slide decks with this much info, but it's really hard to remember all this, so it's for you to refer to back later. So the disaster authorities, we went through all of these authorities. So Mother Nature has historically given us curveballs, which has, you know, issued these. So 1970, fire management, 74, disaster relief, 88, Stafford disaster, and so on and so forth. So, time has made it where we needed more rules and help and regulations to go around these. So again, here's some more historical information about and more history that brings us to today. So, 2022 saw 90 disaster declarations plus 35 fire incidents. Already, as of July 24th of 2023, we've already had 60. So, historically, using historical data to help indicate the future conditions doesn't exactly work because we can't predict a fire. We can't predict an earthquake. There's things that have to be put in place beforehand in order to have us prepared and ready for the actual incident and disaster. So, was anybody listening to the presentation? Feel free to drop it in the chat. What do you think was the costliest disaster in US history? And then what was the deadliest? I'm going to open the chat and see what y'all got to say. Looks like you guys were listening. Good job for all of you that's already dropped the information in the chat. So many people said Katrina. And for all of those who said Katrina, you are absolutely correct. So the costliest disaster in US history was Katrina in 2005. It costed $166.3 billion. The next one was Harvey, which was 128 billion. Next one down was Maria in 2017, 92 billion. Anybody have a guess on the deadliest? I didn't cover this one. 9/11. Good job, guys. Although you are not correct. 1900 Galveston hurricane was the deadliest. It killed we still don't have an exact number, between 6,000 and 12,000 people. September 11th killed 2,996 people, for those who guessed September 11th. So with that, there's an exception. Of course, there's an exception to everything. The executive orders were written in 2020 to include pandemics under the disaster umbrella, which put the top 5 at COVID, which was 1.1 million, HIV and AIDS, which was 700,000, 1918 flu, 675,000, and then so on and so forth. I see. Yeah, good job, guys. It looks like the folks in our chat are very, very on top of being involved. All right. So, everything's changing, as you can see, COVID changed our world a lot. And with that, every disaster changes the way we look at everything. So now let's talk a little bit about how disasters are declared. And I see something popped up in the Q&A. Will this presentation be available after the training? Yes, the presentation will be available after the training. So the process is kind of a ground up process. Everybody thinks that FEMA is the first stop, and it's absolutely not true. So the damages have to be assessed. Damage indicators have to be met. Local authorities must declare a state of emergency. So there's one key. The governor must request a presidential declaration, and then FEMA regional director must approve it before it lands on the president's desk. This all has to be done within 30 days of the date of incident. So every state has a disaster. I gotta move this thing. Okay, sorry, something popped up on my screen. Every state has a disaster registration and emergency management operations in place. It's actually a law. Every state has to have it. So every parish and county, and parish is on here because in back east, some of them are referred to as parishes instead of counties. Presidents and mayors can declare a state of emergency within their jurisdiction. Then the governor can declare a state of emergency for the entire state as well. State Disasters Act. So in Washington, the emergency management in Washington state is authorized by the laws contained in chapter 3852 RCW. I won't bore you with all of the details of it because I'd like y'all to stay awake. And then in Idaho, the State Disaster Preparedness Act is 46-001. So every state has acts that guide them and direct them on how they are supposed to go through the processes and procedures and their rules and their regulations. So the process: county, state, president, FEMA, which isn't listed on here. So we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between, what the different presidential declarations are. There's an emergency declaration and then there's a major declaration. So the Stafford Disaster Relief and Emergency Assistance Act authorized the president to issue an emergency or major disaster declaration or both that overwhelm the combined capabilities of the state and local government's resources. So when this happens, the state and local resources all have to already be exhausted. So, and here's the differences between the two. So emergency declarations are issued for impending emergencies or disasters. So when it starts, this is what they're going to predict is going to happen. So then they just state, they do an emergency declaration. It has to be determined by the president. Federal assistance is needed to supplement the state, so to help assist the state and local efforts to save the lives and property, and to lessen or avert the threat of a catastrophe. So fires are this is really common when there's a lot of fires, when the federal government helps assist and supplement the state and local efforts to help with these. The total amount of assistance provided for a single event cannot exceed $5 million. Is COVID considered a disaster? I believe I just touched on that. Do you still have more questions about that, Jade? And then, will this discussion include emergency preparedness planning? Not exactly, Lee. That's a little bit different topic.
Hey, Lisa, I was actually just responding to
Oh,
Lee. I just thought I'll just pop in here and just say, I think it's a fantastic idea. Maybe what we didn't talk about was that we're going to be doing 6 segments of this class. And so this is just the introduction. Then we're going to get somebody here from FEMA, somebody here from Army Corps of Engineers, Washington State, etc. So although we don't have that, the emergency preparedness, we'll keep it in mind because I think we'll be rolling these out throughout the year.
thank you.
Yeah, like I said, I'm trying to do Q&A for you so you don't get.
I'm not used to having help, so I appreciate it. So, and then moving forward, so a major declaration. And to answer the other question about COVID, yes, it's considered a disaster because it falls under pandemic category. So major declaration, so the difference. So it's issued post-disaster. So the previous one, so the emergency declaration happens when it's happening. Major declaration happens after the disaster. So it's about 75 to 100% of the cost share reimbursement. Again, has to be determined by the president. And the event has caused damage of such severity that it's beyond the capabilities of state and local. So again, they need the federal government's help because it's beyond of the capabilities of state and local. So fire management assistance declaration. So here's the third one that wasn't listed on the one page on the previous page. These are initiated at the time a threat of major disaster exists. So determined by FEMA regional director on an expedited basis. So every we're all chunked into different regions, and then we'll dive a little bit more on what region we're sitting in here later. It also provides 75% of the federal cost share, as well as this, and then the state pays the remaining 25%. So here was that big takeaway that I was talking about before certain things can happen. So the process to request a presidential declaration. So as a prerequisite to requesting a presidential declaration, the governor must first issue an emergency declaration for the state or the disaster area. So these, a lot of people think it comes from FEMA and flows down. It actually flows the exact opposite. So it's local, state, then federal, where FEMA comes in. So the state or the governor must first issue the declaration for the state or the disaster area. What happens sometimes, and this summer was a good example of that. We went from a disaster area to a state of emergency. And our governor we had some fires over here, the Oregon Road Fire and the Medical Lake Fire. Those were considered disaster areas, and then it soon expanded across the state because we ended up with many other fires as well. So after the state of emergency declaration is made, the governor makes a request for the president disaster declaration by sending a letter to the president through the FEMA regional administrator. So it has to go through our regional office. Then the letter has to cover these 4 things. Certifies the event has overwhelmed state and local resources. So resources have now been exhausted. Federal assistance is now required. The governor has issued that state of emergency, and the governor has directed the execution of the emergency operations plan, or the EOP. I have some links that I can share if you're interested in reading more about that EOP, but I don't think that is in this slide deck. Now this picture, these pictures are a little bit saddening. So this was actually one of our colleagues' house. Her name is Jennifer. She was actually the one that taught us about this house. In June 16th, 2023, this at 1:30 in the morning, she had a hurricane come through her place. And these were some of the as result. So this was categorized as an emergency. It was localized. It was an F1 tornado, winds between 80 and 110 miles per hour, the width of 2,100 yards, and it traveled about 7.78 miles on the ground, causing $2 million in damages. The city had requested and was given a state of emergency from the governor, and the state government reimbursed the city 75%. To make a determination for a disaster declaration, damages assessed must be made and damage indicators are met. So when you folks are losing their homes to tornadoes or hurricanes or fires or flooding, those damages, those have to be documented and then submitted. So then that way the state is able to help more. So to make the determination for disaster declaration, I said that. The 2023 per capita indicator, so statewide, $1.77 times the population of the state or county wide. So it's $4.44 times the population of that county, according to the CFR 206/48 Code of Federal Regulations. So when you're going through, it's worth to document, ahead of time. So then that way, when things happen, you know how much everything's worth. So if a fire burns down and the insurance company's like, oh, well, your homeowner's insurance only covers this much money for your jewelry. And it's actually, so it says 5,000, it's actually 15,000. These are good things, make sure everything's up to date ahead of time, because when that disaster happens, you need to be able to be ready. And we don't want this to be you. And my mouse decided it doesn't. There we go. Sorry. So this is another example of, we'll skip this one. So it's important to be aware of some scams. Let's see. So per our ABTAC website, so all of you guys have access to our ABTAC website, which our organization name is going to be changing here soon. Never mind. So in the aftermath of a disaster, potential contractors swarm to the site hoping for a piece of the Cleanup and Recovery Act. It gets really chaotic and super confusing, and it can be a very cutthroat, area. So you need to have these relationships done and in place before a disaster happens. There's some things that you can do preemptively to be able to be ready for these disasters, so you're able to be called out for these disasters. I know that there was a lot of fire suppression clients on here, or fire suppression companies on here, so therefore you guys know that, to be called out on fire, there's things you guys have to do ahead of time. This works and is the same in every other industry and every other field when it comes to these disasters. So with that, there's also, in the aftermath of the disasters, there's there's third-party companies that falsely promise no bid contracts and get you big bucks to get put on priority vendors list. There isn't a such thing. A lot of this has to be done ahead of time. So the officials in charge of the relief efforts are overwhelmed with information. It could be hard to come by. A really good example of this is that when the Oregon Road fire struck, 10 miles from my home, I actually went on vacation, and my poor colleagues were inundated with companies that wanted to help. And so we had to take 10 steps back and make sure that they were legitimate companies, because every person came out of the woodwork that wanted to help because they thought there was going to be big dollars involved, and B, to make sure that there was those processes and procedures put in place already, because this has to be something done ahead of time. And on the other side of that, there's, these third-party companies that say, oh yeah, I can put you on a priority list that doesn't even exist. So just beware. When in doubt, always reach out, and please, 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 please ask.
Hey, Alicia, I just want to, I actually got taken in by a scam earlier this week. That was a really good one. The best thing to look out for is to only answer to .gov emails and no .coms. And the one that I got stuck in this week, it was fsdgov.com, but the .com, it didn't even register. So it's a great way to register in my mind, I mean. So anyway, that's the number one key, is always look at the send.
That's a great tip. Thank you. That was a new one that I've heard of. I haven't heard of that one yet, so I just learned something new today.
Yeah, it got me.
Yeah. So is of the essence equals dirty market research. And dirty market research doesn't mean like we're gonna go in and scam people. It means that you need to know before the disaster strikes, you're ready to get dirty to do the help. So make sure all your registrations are up to date and they're active and they're optimized across everything. So we won't dive too deep into registrations today, but there's places that you need to be registered in, like sam.gov, which there's a slide on we'll talk about in a little bit. You need to be registered with your state or your locals and stuff like that. Make sure your online presence is well representative. So what that means is if you have a website, make sure it reflects what you actually do. Make sure that when the registrations of your databases, your website, everything's parallel. I can't stress enough about how everything needs to be parallel, because if you're raising red flags to the government, they're not going to call you, especially in a time that they need your help the most. Do periodic direct targeted marketing before the disaster strikes. Cannot emphasize that enough. If you want to work in the time of disaster, you need to be ready before the time of disaster. SAM registration, System for Awards Management registration, can take like up to 2 weeks, guys. And by that time, the fire's out. Well, not necessarily, but it's an example. And do your research. Always research to find the contract opportunities, because a lot of these are set ahead of time so that when a disaster strikes, it's already ready. So where to begin? That probably was like, okay, what do I do now? You need to register as a vendor with your county government if it's required. Some counties require it, some counties do not. It just depends on where you're located. Do you periodic direct marketing? Remind them that you still exist. Some of that could be as simple as attending an event that an Apex Accelerator hosts. So we do meet the agencies or meet the buyer event, from time to time. It's just reminding them that you're here. Register as a vendor with the state. So every state's registration vendor is a little bit different. So Washington has Webb's, Idaho has something else, Montana, Oregon, so on and so forth. And then register with the state's Business Emergency Operations Center as well. This, is dotting those I's and crossing those T's by making sure you're registered with both. And then register to do business with the federal government. So that's sam.gov that I keep speaking of. And then there's a disaster response registry within sam.gov. As you're going through the steps, it asks you, register with FEMA through their industry liaison program, and then register with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, because when it gets to that point, that's who we need to be registered with. And then contracting in the state of disaster during disasters. I'm going to peek at the chat, and it looks like Rebecca is obviously 110% on it, so thank you. So state and local.
More about sam.gov if she has other questions about that.
Say that again.
I just was thinking that if there are businesses on here that want to know how to register on sam.gov, we can cover that a little bit later.
Yeah. So be sure to register as a vendor with and market directly to the states and counties that you're residing in. So Spokane County has their own website. Every county has their own websites, and within those, most likely, most of them have procurement portals within themselves. A lot of counties and local agencies are also beginning to get registered and utilize MRSC roster as well, or mrsc.org as well, as there are some rules and regulations that are going to be in place next summer to make sure that they are using those. But you do have to remember that your first response in any disaster is your state and local government. When there's a fire, your local fire department is usually the first person on scene, and then it quickly goes to DNR or the Department of Natural Resources. When there's flooding or anything like that, your local police officers or local governments, those are always the first ones on the scene, and then it grows from there. So it stacks on top of each other. So you need to make sure that you're registered with your state procurement portals, and then your local ones as well if they're different. And then, it says OSP office, that's Office of Small Procurement Buying Office, or some places it's a little bit different. I apologize for the way this screen looks. It was really weird and hard to update it. It looks like a weird, a scan. But our state purchasing registration site is WEBS, or the Washington Electronic for Business Solutions. I should have listed MRSC on here as well, because they will be the authoritative one in Washington State. Department of Enterprise Services never going to get rid of WEBS, so that one is always going to be there, but we will have two as of next summer that you should be registered in. This is an example of, Homeland Security and emergency preparedness contacts. These are not our local contacts, so just keep that in mind. If you are paying attention to the screen, this one does say Louisiana, so these are not our local ones. But when the governor declares a state of emergency, the governor's Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness activates the Emergency Operations Center for Disaster Response and Recovery. So as you can see on the screen, all of these people are responsible for different areas. They're called parishes over in Louisiana. Ours would say counties, and it would tell you who the director of each of those areas are and what their websites are. So in order to find your state's emergency management agency, and we actually kind of made this easy for you on the next slide, you go to usa.gov, state emergency management, and that tells you your state. So if you're not located in Washington State, if you're one of my Idaho people that came over to visit, welcome, and I'm glad you're here, because I don't have an example of the Idaho one. This is how you find that, and then it goes through and tells you what you do. So in Washington, our emergency management division is actually through the Washington Military Department. So it doesn't look quite the same as other states, but this is the right page. And there's a bunch of quick links on here. So if you're looking at a training calendar, emergency alerts, so on and so forth, somebody asked about emergency preparedness. I do believe that they offer some emergency preparedness on here, but I will see what I can do to help us get an emergency preparedness class set up in this series, because this is going to go well beyond just today. Registering with the EOC. So the benefits of registering, or your emergency operations center. So this is, you know, part of your emergency management. So you'll get information of alerts of the public announcements from government agencies. So when you register on that site, you can actually register for their newsletter, and you can get monthly newsletters or biweekly. They'll notify you as the needs arise. So as you'll see the status reports and emergency products and services and stuff like that. And when there is an emergency, you'll see donations, volunteer support, things that they need during that response. So even if you're not a company, if you are a person and want to donate, then you have the ability to do that. Again, this is not our site, because some of this, this is the emergency management compact. So each state does implement an emergency management assistance compact. You just have to do a little bit of digging to find ours. And there's a question in the Q&A. Oh, it looks like Rebecca's on it.
But actually, we have one for you, Alicia.
Okay, cool.
Are we going to send the presentation out to everybody that registered, or do they need to specifically request a copy?
So during the registration process, you guys got to put your emails in, so I can send it out to everybody.
Thank you.
So doing business with FEMA, are there any more other questions that we should hop on and address while we're at a pause slide? No, we're good. Okay. All right. So FEMA follows the statutory small business goals and the FAR requirements on the purchasing protocol. So what does that mean for you? FEMA, when they issue their contracts ahead of time, have set aside goals. So 23% of their overall small business goals are set aside for small businesses. Underneath that, they also have the service SDB, so small disadvantaged business, which is also known as the 8A program, Hub Zone, service disabled, veteran owned, and woman owned. So these are a lot of solicitations or opportunities over 25,000. Actually, they're all over 25,000 are on sam.gov. So once you're registered on sam.gov, you can also see opportunities on sam.gov. You don't even have to sign into SAM. It's a public facing website. So the federal government will do something called a sources sought, and that's their version of doing market research. So you see down here at the bottom where it says the rule of two for set asides. Whenever a solicitation is in, or a agency like FEMA is in their market research phase, if two or more of a certain socioeconomic category or small business responds with a sufficient response, they can then use the rule of two to set it aside specifically for a small business or one of these other socioeconomic categories. And my mouse doesn't want to look in. So, a little bit on the purchasing protocol. I won't dive all the way down into this rule and regulation. It is here as a tool for you, so you can go back and look at it. But this is available acquisition flexibilities. So what that means is that there's a few different thresholds within the government marketplace, and most of this happens in all day-to-day government contracting. So there is a simplified acquisition threshold, or a SAT, which is typically 250,000 and below. From underneath that SAT, the federal government does their due diligence to set aside those solicitations specifically for small businesses. During a disaster, it goes up to 800,000. So that means that they do everything they can possibly do to keep given it to small businesses, such as pretty much everybody on here. There's also something called a purchase card purchase, or a we call them G cards or P cards, or there's a few different terminologies for them. But these sit under a micro purchase threshold. So anything for supplies under $10,000, services under $2,500, and construction under $2,000. And these are normal, typical, everyday across the board. Disasters can change that dollar threshold up to $20,000 if it's approved. A good example of that was during COVID. The supplies purchase card threshold was bumped up to $20,000 because government could not get masks, fast enough, or other things fast enough to like help go through this. So there's another thing called targeted purchasing too. So when FEMA comes into play, or starts getting involved in all of these, FEMA uses vendors from what is called the epicenter of the event first. So if there is a hurricane in Florida, they're going to start in Florida with those small businesses. And then as they exhaust the resources, they'll continue to move outward. So for full transparency, guys, the likelihood of being called from here to Florida when a hurricane strikes isn't huge. However, if you have something that's unique and you know that there isn't any more than 10 of you across the nation, that's a little bit different circumstances. But they call that, it's like the bullseye procurement. So they're going to start close to help, the local economy in this disaster, and then they're going to continue to go outward. But there is a rule that regulates that. So that's the FAR subpart 26.2. So for those of you that don't know what FEMA means, it means Federal Emergency Management Agency. So in order to do business with FEMA, you have to be registered in SAM, or the System for Awards Management. During the SAM registration process, there will be a question that asks if you want to be listed in the disaster response registry. I couldn't tell you which question it is off the top of my head, but it is a question within SAM. If you check the box yes, then you're able to list what state, multiple states, or any state. What this does is it optimizes the profiles in the dynamic small business search, so that if FEMA is looking for a business that's already registered in SAM in a locality that has checked the box within the disaster response registry. Registering with FEMA directly through their industry liaison program. Registering with FEMA directly in their industry liaison program does not give you preference, though. I do have to stress that. So if you're in there and you know that Bob the Builder down in Florida was not in there, that doesn't mean they're going to call you instead of Bob the Builder. They do use that bullseye effect. So System for Awards Management. I know there was questions in the chat about this. So the System for Awards Management is where you register your entity in order to do business with the federal government. During this registration process, you will have to validate your entity first. So you do need to have a legal business within whatever state it is that you do business with. You will need to have your company registered with the IRS. So you'll need to have an employer identification number or a tax identification number. You will need to be registered within the state that you are doing business of. You will also need a bank account for this too. So because the federal government doesn't like to mail checks anymore, they primarily do direct deposit. And as you're going through all of these registrations, I will be very transparent and cannot stress enough that your physical address must match across every one of them. So when you register for the state of Washington, your address needs to be the same as when you register with the IRS. And please do not put PO boxes on there, because you will have to go back and fix it before you can register in SAM, because they validate your physical address. After you go through the validation step, then you finish the registration after you're assigned your UEI. You will go through about an hour's worth of questions or so that ask if you've ever been debarred from the government or if you had felonies. There's also questions about being a foreign owned or domestic corporation or an inverted corporation and things of that sort. This registration process can take up to 2 weeks as long as the government is functioning properly. It can take much, much longer if any of the steps along the way get backlogged. So if you want to do this, register now. So we talked about the disaster response registry section. So SAM contains a disaster response registry, which shows the contractors who are willing to provide debris removal supplies and services during a disaster. So it's literally right after, as you're going through your information within SAM. So it'll ask you right here, do you want to be in the disaster response registry? Yes. Does your company require bonding to bid on contract? A lot of companies ask me, how do I know? Well, 9 times out of 10, if you're not a construction company, that's not a requirement. In most states have requirements for construction companies to be to have bonding for their contracts. So do please keep that in mind. And when it talks about the geographic area served, you can do any state if you're willing to travel from here to Florida. You can do one state if you only want to serve the state that you're in or a state close to you. Within there, you could also even dial it down to specific counties. That part is not required. So if you just want to do the whole state, you can. Or if you click multiple states, it will allow you to choose 3. So FEMA's Industry Liaison Program. So this looks like a very clunky PDF form, but it's actually, this is just a visual representation. It's not an accurate, nor is it the most up to date, because as you can see, it asks about DUNS numbers, which are not necessary, which are not required anymore. This will have the link to the FEMA liaison program, so you can go directly to the FEMA website to fill it out. You will submit. So I'm not sure if they've converted it to just a fillable form online or if it's still a PDF that you have to download. But traditionally speaking, it's been a PDF. You download it and then you email it to this company or to FEMA directly with your company name, state, and the month, day, and year. So that way they know what day you submitted it when they're going through. And then you can request a meeting in box 8. So if they still have this and this is current, they update these all the time. You can request a meeting so that you can, talk about your company, and this is a good way to advertise yourself. So FEMA's broken up in regions, so we all have different regions. We are region 10. Our home base is in Seattle. So I did touch base on the dynamic small business search as well. So the federal government uses it's been a long day, guys, sorry. The dynamic small business search as a database for vendors. So it is a great way to find small businesses that are already registered and active in SAM, so they don't have to push pause on what they're doing, which they do not have time for in a disaster. If you reach out to an agency and you're not registered in SAM in the middle of a disaster, they can't help, they can't use you. So you need to have this taken care of before disaster strikes. So what they do is they'll go through and they'll search for a specific NAICS code, or they'll search by keywords. They'll check the disaster response registry box within there, and they will search. So make sure that this is up to date. So you can do this through your SBA profile, which is separate from SAM. So a lot of your information from SAM flows into the dynamic small business search, but there's other things that you can add to it as well, like your capabilities narrative, some keywords, past performance, and the past performance can actually be residential, commercial, or government related. So do keep that in mind. Also, this is a search result from the DSBS, and I know it's really hard to read, but the purpose is not for you to read every single company on the screen. The purpose is for you to keep an eye on this capabilities narrative column on the right. So FEMA, along with a lot of other federal agencies, will utilize this to find companies that can perform the work that they're looking for. It's also what they use part of it as their market research phase too, to determine whether or not there are enough small businesses already registered in SAM. See all these ones with that don't have capabilities narratives on them, 9 times out of 10, the government will go right past these. Because they have no idea what the company does. And if the company name isn't clear, like what they do, so Bob's General Contracting. Okay, well, what the heck does Bob's General Contracting do? I don't know. Skip. So, and especially during a state of a disaster, like, okay, cool, we are a commercial plumbing company. Score. I can get a hold of these guys and they can get the plumbing taken care of in this building that, collapsed. They can, or, that's half burnt down. They can come in here and get things straightened up before there's flood damage. So I'm going to ask you guys, when you're looking at this, where do your eyes go? Do they go to the blank spaces, or are you like already trying to read the small print on my screen? Areas filled out. Show me the region again, please. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I can do that. So hopefully I answered the question about the regions. So
Hey,
we are
Alicia,
in region 10.
I think we need to come up with a plan B because look at the time.
I do
Uh,
think we need to come up with a plan B. You are correct. So we're at
yeah,
4:56. I did block this out for an hour and a half. So those of you that have to trickle off can. But for the rest of this, I will try to be super quick. So
and I think
go
the
ahead.
plan is, I just wanted to, because I know some people, it's been a long day. Mondays are always hard, especially after a weekend. That Alicia and I are going to be doing these throughout the year. So this will, not only will the presentation be available, I'm probably going to do one as well. So if you stay tuned, we will be able to repeat this one. And like I said, just keep coming to the ones every Monday afternoon for a while.
Yep. And so this next section is actually potentially going to be covered in one of our later classes by a FEMA representative, as long as we can finish getting some things sorted out. So I am not going to dive deep into what does FEMA purchase. They purchase a ton of things. There are specific categories though that they do. This is their top purchases. Again, you will get a copy of this. And then there's pre-positioned contracts for goods and services. So like I said before, cannot stress enough, there are other things that get taken care of before disaster strikes. In the slide deck that you will receive, there is a link that says advanced contracts can be found at on this slide, and it'll take you directly to what they're looking for right now. Providing transportation to FEMA. So here's some links so that you can get set up to provide transportation to FEMA as well if you're a transportation company. Subcontracting with Homeland Security. So DHS maintains a list of active prime contractors. Keep your information up to date, guys. And then so you can go to dhs.gov to see their prime contractors as well. If any of you want to dive deeper into any of this with Rebecca or myself, both of us are more than happy to dive deep. Rebecca, will you put your email address in the chat? Because I do believe that only mine is at the end of this presentation, which before I send it out, Rebecca's will be on there as well.
It's in there. I'm already getting emails.
Yep. And then monitor contracting opportunity sites. So contract opportunities are available on sam.gov. That's your federal government. FedBid is now Unison Marketplace. Unison Marketplace is for supplies. So if you provide services, Unison is not the place for you. But if you provide supplies, it is. Homeland Security. So this link right here will take you directly to their acquisition planning forecast. It's going to help you figure out their anticipated contracts. So these aren't available to bid on now, but they are coming down the pipeline. Another part is the role of the Army Corps of Engineers. These are the 6 categories that the Army Corps of Engineers helps with. So temp power, debris, temp housing, temp roofing. So if you provide any of these services, you need to be registered with the Army Corps of Engineers. To save you some hurt and heartache, because their website is hard to navigate. There is a link down here at the bottom of the page, And these tell you all about how to do business with the Army Corps of Engineers. Rebecca and I are happy to help. And then it goes through their contractor database as well, so you can be put on their database too. So emergency operations, headquarters of armies of engineers, they use pre-awarded contracts that can be activated for missions. So again, be ready before it happens. There's a couple more links that are really useful about contracting, their contracting and disaster page. And then they have a disaster impact models too that will give you like a sim of a disaster. So bottom line, hopefully you guys heard me say it. You guys have to market yourselves. The government has to know you exist. You need to be registered in the procurement portals and touch base with these contracting officers. So, and we'll be learning them more as we go. So we'll have, like Rebecca said, we're going to be doing this at least every Monday for the next few weeks, covering different spots and pieces and categories. So again, I just said this, register in your databases. If you qualify for a certification, which we did not touch base on at all today, get certified as long as it's going to be a benefit, and monitor those procurement sites. For time's sake, we will not get into a capability statement, but they are not all created equal. You don't have one, let us know. We will go through it with you. And then there you go. So there's my contact information on this slide. Before I send this out, a couple of more of these slides will be updated, and Rebecca's contact information will be on here as well. So with that, thank you all so much for being patient with us today, and dealing with our hiccups and things of that sort. Yep, and Rebecca, is there any other last minute questions, you guys? Need more time. That was fast but good. Thank you for the feedback. We greatly appreciate it. So with that, I hope you all have a wonderful night. Please keep the questions coming. We'll plan for the next one to potentially be longer if that's what we end up needing. So have a good night, everybody. Thank you so much.